Welcome to episode 26 of the Free Your Spirit podcast. In this week's episode, we're actually going to be diving into ancestral exploration and healing. This is the work that I love to do with my clients, and it's a hugely important, powerful part of who we are. And in this week's episode, I shall be sharing with you more of that. We're actually bringing back an episode from the archives, one of our most downloaded episodes, all about ancestral healing. But before I dive in, I just want to give a little bit of context to why I'm sharing this episode this week. Last week, you remember, episode 25, I sort of shared with you my own deeply personal journey in life and how for the longest time I resisted really stepping into my fullest, greatest potential. And I resisted it because everything in my life up until that point, up until my mid-30s, everything I'd experienced was telling me, if you listen to that episode, that I wasn't good enough, and specifically that I wasn't good at math. And yet, and I emerged from the education system with that belief, believing that I'm not good enough, letting go of all of my entrepreneurial dreams, and yet over and over again for another decade and a half, positions in finance kept being presented to me and I kept pushing them away. It's like, well, I'm no good at finance. I sucked at school. That was the meaning I took from my experience in school. I suck. I'm not good enough. And so these opportunities would come and I wouldn't go for them because I'd formed a belief that there was no way I could even do that. And this is why it's so important for us, I think, to do that exploration at a present life level, past life and ancestral level, because oftentimes there are these walls that we've put up that we don't even know exist, and they're preventing us from really going after our big goals and dreams, from pursuing the things that we love. And I have to say that I just pushed opportunity away time after time after time and again, because I was afraid, I thought I would fail, I thought I wasn't good enough, and all of those beliefs kept surfacing for me. And yet it was the one thing when I actually finally was forced really to accept the challenge. And I was forced to accept the challenge because I was in a position where I was in a country, living in Amsterdam, I didn't know anybody, no friends, because I just separated from my first husband. Like, I had to get a grip and I had to start taking chances and start taking risks, because really and truly, when you feel you've lost everything, you've got nothing left to lose. And it took me to get into, I had to be put like between a rock and a hard place before I was even willing to stick my head above the parapet, just to step out and start taking chances and risks. And this is why I am so deeply passionate about the work that I do when I work with my clients at a present life, past life and ancestral level, to help them uncover those invisible blocks, those walls that have gone up that are preventing them from going after their big goals and dreams. And maybe you know what it is you want and you're going after it, but you're not getting it. It's not happening quick enough, fast enough. You're not getting the traction. Then I would say very likely there's something that's getting in the way. There's a wall that has to be broken down, and you can do this through the process of just exploring your past and letting go of those rotten beliefs actually that don't support you. And I wasted decades of my life because I didn't understand this, I didn't do the work, and that's why I'm deeply passionate, because I don't want that for you. I don't want you to waste any more time. Life's short. We're only here for a finite amount of time. And one of the biggest regrets most people have when they reach their rocking chair moment, it's they didn't live the life that they wanted. They're living a life maybe that other people expected of them, or maybe just being a little bit more fearless. Because I think when you face that moment in your life when this is it, it's like, what the F, like, why didn't I just go for things in my life? And so in this week, I really wanted to dive more into, last week we were looking at present life, beliefs that we can acquire from our experiences, but a lot of the things that we do, a lot of the motivations that we have, oftentimes it's been passed to us by our ancestors. And in this week's episode, I'm going to be talking and diving more deeply into that, how that works, how it is that our ancestors actually influence us today, and how when you do the deep work and exploration, you can actually start to uncover those invisible blocks. Maybe your ancestors there was a thing about money, being brought up in the Great Depression, or for me, Scottish ancestry, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of fear because we lived on the borders and there was a lot of skirmishes between the English and the Scottish. So as a young child, I had a lot of fears and they didn't make sense, right? They were totally irrational, but they didn't make sense because, I was living in a very different environment to my ancestors. And I talk more about this and I dive more into epigenetics and why it is that the experiences of our ancestors actually can impact us today. So it's a super juicy episode. And I really just want to lean in before we actually dive into this episode, that this journey, if you think about it, the stuff that our ancestors fears and what have you that we need to let go of, but what about the gifts? What about the beautiful things that our ancestors did in their lives, the talents and gifts that they have? We can tap into that too. That's passed down to us too. And I know, even if you don't know who your ancestors are, I will say that in the work that I do, we're working in the sort of spiritual realm, so you can tap into that, and you can come to know and understand more about your ancestral lineage and history. It's not about a paper trail. It's not about that. It's about tapping into those higher states and realms of awareness and consciousness and really understanding who you are in the context of your family history, in the context of your lineage, in the context of all of the experiences that your ancestors had. And if you think about it, like a really big thing for me is this journey and this work that I love to do with my clients, and I'm so passionately driven to do because I wasted way too much time in my life, and it feels so good when you can really step into your fullest, greatest potential. But oftentimes, and teachers will probably want to shoot me down on this one, I know the education system's better, but there's a lot of things we have to unlearn about what we've been taught about who we are and what we're capable of. I was taught, or came away with the belief, that I was just a loser, and a loser at math and all of those things. And yet in my family, in my ancestral history, entrepreneurship is in my family. It's in my lineage. My granny used to tell me about, I think it was her auntie, it was her mother's sister, and she had a little shop that she opened, and she used to say to me, I think it was her auntie, she could neither read nor write. You heard that. She couldn't read, she couldn't write, she wasn't taught math, she didn't go to school, or she wasn't able to. And so she conjured her own system to do mathematics, to add up whatever people bought. She'd have a line going horizontal, that would be a penny, and I think a line across, vertical line might be a shilling. There was a whole visual matrix that she established that would support her. And the reason why I'm sharing this is we're so encouraged that you've got to have certificates and diplomas and degrees and all of these things to be able to do the things that you want. And yes, to a certain degree, you need those things when you're working in the system. But what I'm about is transcending the system and really reimagining and recreating a life for yourself that doesn't have to be confined to the system. And my granny's sister did that for herself. She was an entrepreneur. I learned, if I stuck with what the education system was telling me that I was able to do, I never would have embraced the whole financial thing. I would have given up on my entrepreneurial dreams, and yet that is a part of me. I would have let that part of me go. And when you allow a part of you to go, you allow it to die, right? There's a part of you that isn't being expressed, and a part of you that really effectively you're just it withers, right? If you don't nourish a plant, if you don't feed it, if you don't give it the nourishment it needs, it'll die. And so if you have a dream, if you have something that's in your heart that you want to do, I've had clients, that have been artists, like that is their thing, and yet something was said to them at school, or they saw somebody else that they thought was better than them, and it's like, well, I better not go for that because I'm not as good as XYZ. Well, here's the thing. Maybe you're not, but you're just different. And that doesn't mean that you can't go after your dreams. And a flower, that little tiny seed, it knows what it needs to do. It just needs the right conditions to flourish and grow. And I think that this is what this work is about. It's about really preparing doing the groundwork, working on our roots, the root system, the parts of us that need nurturing, that need healing, and the parts of us that need to be encouraged to thrive and to grow. Like back in the day, people didn't necessarily have to have diplomas and degrees and engineering and the whole thing to build houses, to build cathedrals. It was something that was kind of innate. And the work that I do is really about tapping into our innate knowing, our wisdom at an ancestral level. That's what we're talking about today. But it all ties back so powerfully to the fact that we are infinite, we are immortal, and we are eternal. We're not just the physical representation of who we are. We're spiritual beings. And once we clear away all of this stuff that is preventing us from seeing that, tapping into that, the more we can clear the channel, open up our connection to our spirit, our soul, our ancestors, our guides, our guardians, the easier our journey and path through life can become. So I guess it really is an unlearning and a remembering of who we truly are. And I'll just say one last thing about this. Kids, children, they know that. You see children, how the joy, like the wonder, the fearlessness, because they're really close to source. They're close to who they are, knowing, like they don't go around saying, I'm a spiritual being. No. But do they go around thinking that they're invincible and that they can do anything and filled with joy? Yes. And I think it's important we can learn a lesson from them, learn a lesson from who we used to be as kids, where we felt we were unstoppable and had these big dreams. And the work that I do is about remembering that, tapping into that, nurturing that, clearing the SH1T at a present life, past life, and ancestral level, so that we can just free ourselves to be who we truly are, minus all this societal, educational, family conditioning that's kind of been layered over us. A bit like keep putting wallpaper on wallpaper on wallpaper, and it's like there's beauty when we dig deep to find it, and it's powerful. So that's my little rant, folks. But I hope that in listening that you could take away that you're incredibly powerful. Whatever's in your heart for you to do, I just really encourage you to tap into that. And in this week's episode, we're actually diving into more of who we are, how we're influenced by our ancestors and the power of ancestral healing, and why it's important for us to do this deeper exploration, and how, I'm giving you a little bit of the sort of background as to why it is and how it is that our ancestors' experiences are influencing us today. And that, even though we might be packing around stuff that isn't even ours, we're not stuck with it. We can release it, we can let it go when we do the work to discover it and heal it. So I hope you enjoy this week's episode. It's probably one of the most popular downloaded episodes of 2021. So we're bringing it back to you from the archives, and it's a very thorough deep dive. And I'd love to know, once you've listened, what your takeaways were from it. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. In today's episode, we're going to be covering what I think to be a really juicy topic. As you've heard me say, we are layered spiritual beings who come into this world with a past life history, and an ancestral history. So in today's episode, we're going to be diving into exploring more about our ancestral past and how our ancestors have a powerful and beautiful influence on our present day life. We're going to be exploring our ancestral history and lineage and how it's important, because as we connect with our ancestors, we have a powerful opportunity to explore and remember the ancestral gifts that are buried within our cellular memory, as well as exploring perhaps the less positive beliefs that may be impacting our present day life. And it's important to remember, especially in those moments in your life where you may feel alone or a little unnerved, that when you stand in a room, thousands stand with you. That's a powerful image right there that you can draw on in times of need. And remember too that your ancestors have your back at all times and are standing in the wings ready to support you at every turn when you reach out for their help. I mean, think about it for a moment. It likely goes without saying that if someone you loved needed your support, you would be there for them. And it's no different with our ancestors. And the very fact that they are in the unseen realms, that they live in the realms of spirit, this alone gives them a powerful perspective and vantage point on how they can help and support us. Why? Well, because they see the totality of who we are and what our life's work is. And in this way, they are powerfully positioned to support us as we journey forth. So it's usually helpful and important for us to open ourselves to this powerful channel of communication with our ancestors. So how do we do that? How do we connect with them? Well, since our ancestors live inside of us, we have a simple yet powerful opportunity to reach within to connect. Our ancestors are really only a breath away. And I personally love to use the medium of guided ancestral journeys to support my clients as they travel through time and through the ethers to connect with their ancestors. Our ancestors can also come through to us through the dream time, because it's so much easier for them to access us in our dreams because our conscious mind switched off and off duty. And so they have that opportunity to connect with us. We can also connect with our ancestors through the creation of an ancestral altar in our home. Altars offer a powerful and symbolic connection to the spiritual realms. So in creating an ancestral altar, you're creating a powerful connection to your ancestors in your home and in your life. Lighting a candle is also a beautifully symbolic way to acknowledge and welcome the presence of your ancestors. And as you do so, you can offer up a simple prayer to acknowledge and connect with them. There can be no doubt that connecting with our ancestry offers us a powerful opportunity to understand our past, our present, and this awareness and understanding can powerfully empower our future. Many Indigenous cultures around the world continue to acknowledge the presence and important role their ancestors play in their daily lives. Though sadly, there are so many more cultures that have lost this connection to their ancestors. However, that said, there's a fast-growing understanding of the importance our ancestors play in empowering our present and our future. As you may know, there are millions of people who recognize the importance of knowing who and where they come from. And as a result, they're doing the work to uncover their ancestral roots. Currently, around 15 million people have taken the Ancestry.com DNA test, in which they put a little bit of spittle in a tube and they send it off for analysis. But it's important to remember, Ancestry.com couldn't do any of their analysis without our input. And this is further proof of how our ancestors live within us, how their presence is powerfully encoded within our DNA and our cellular memory. In this way, even if you don't know who your biological ancestors are, maybe you were adopted, it's still, though, possible to do this deep inner soul work because our ancestors live within us and around us in the unseen realms. Perhaps you can see how hugely beneficial it can be to harness the collective power and wisdom of our ancestors in our everyday life. So how can our ancestors help us? Well, they can guide us and show us how we can explore and activate and empower the strengths, the gifts and abilities that have been passed down through our ancestral line. They can also help us let go of any ancestral trauma that has travelled through the ancestral line that may be creating challenges in our lives. This piece is hugely important. You may recall how I've touched upon in previous episodes how our beliefs play a powerful role in our behaviour and in the results that manifest in our lives. So, if we want to make a change in our lives, we have to weed out the beliefs that are driving our behaviour. But what happens when we don't know the origin of our beliefs? Because they don't actually belong to us, because they've been passed down to us through our ancestral line. Perhaps you can see how there's a huge opportunity here for us to work at a deep ancestral level. I'm sure as you look around at your family and your upbringing that you already have a sense of the immediate conditioning you've experienced. Likely you have an awareness of some of the patterns that are travelling through your ancestral line. Likely some are obvious, but what about the patterns that you're unaware of? Because there's now a good body of scientific evidence to show that trauma can indeed be passed through the ancestral line. In particular, there's been a considerable amount of scientific research completed around how we respond to and interact with our environment and how the impact of those lived experiences can actually be passed through the generations via epigenetic mechanisms. Studies on humans suggest that children and grandchildren may have felt the epigenetic impact of such traumatic events as famine, the Holocaust, the September 11, 2000 terrorist attacks. In studies conducted on grandchildren of the Holocaust survivors, it was discovered how they carried within them the trauma of previous generations. In essence, perhaps you can begin to see how layer upon layer of ancestral patterning can actually overlay our core essence. And this ancestral patterning has the power to drive our behaviour at deep subconscious levels, leading us to reenact ancestral programming, triggering in us ancestral patterns related to, say, our fight or flight response in certain situations or in our relationship to money, hard work, or whatever the ancestral pattern is. There could be any number, really, of ancestral patterns embedded in our subconscious that are impacting our daily lives. Beliefs related to our work ethic, or feeling maybe mistrustful of others, or feeling fearful without cause. All of this stuff, all of these fears and beliefs aren't necessarily ours. And it's important to dig in to see where these fears and beliefs originate from, so we can heal and let go of the things that really don't serve us. In this way, as we do the work at this deep ancestral level, we can ensure that the buck stops with us, that these patterns don't continue through the bloodline. We truly are complex beings, and during our time together, we'll continue to explore how we're infinite, immortal, eternal, hugely powerful spiritual beings whose life experience spans many, many lifetimes, present, past and ancestral. And in this way, there's so many layers and levels of who we are, who we once were, but very importantly, who we have the potential to become. Not long ago, I was speaking at an international conference in the UK, and at the close of my presentation, I took participants through a guided soul journey, taking them to their future. And it was so heartwarming to hear from people at the close, sharing their aha moments as they tapped into the spiritual realms, receiving powerful messages of guidance and support. One woman in particular stands out because she came to me absolutely elated. She shared how she'd spent a good portion of her life living in fear, as her grandmother had died in her 60s, and her mother had also died in her 60s, and she was really afraid that that was going to be her fate. Yet during that short meditation, she was transported to her future, seeing herself as a happy 80-year-old. The vision had come to her out of the blue. She wasn't even thinking about it, but her spirit was showing her what she needed to see and how her future would unfold. She was so ecstatic to see herself living well into her 80s. A massive weight was lifted from her shoulders, and I don't doubt that her ancestor played a role in showing this vision to her. I share this story because, we can carry any number of heavy beliefs within us, and that's why I love this work, because it's so powerful and impactful, and it allows us to tap into and empower those realms of our consciousness that are far beyond the confines and understanding of everyday conscious reality. They allow us to let go of stuff that doesn't empower us. Now, I also remember when I first started my own journey to explore my ancestral roots, I was really surprised at what I discovered. See, I was able to take myself back through the generations to explore my maternal and paternal ancestral lineage. And what surprised me, though, was to discover a really profound heaviness and sadness in my heart. And it was related to my Scottish grandparents. Now, I'd never met them. So that was really surprising to me, because those feelings were so strong. And then I subsequently came to the understanding that the source of this pain actually lay in the brutal conflict that took place between the Scottish and the English. And since the Armstrong clan, my mum's clan, lived on the English borders, I realised how they were actually living on a real-time knife's edge. There was so much brutality, treachery and betrayal. There were skirmishes and battles with the English, culminating in the forcible removal of Scottish people from their homelands. Homes were burnt down and many fled the country. And as I came to understand my history, I also came to grips with the very likely origin of a great number of my own irrational fears that I'd experienced as a child and also into my adult years. You see, for a very, very long time in my life, I was so fearful and mistrustful of others. I had a very irrational fear of losing everything, a fear of my home burning down, a fear of being burgled, you name it. I was afraid of it. It was for many years before my own spiritual awakening and journey, that I actually was able to let go of this. So perhaps you're beginning to see how the experiences, the trauma and the fears of our ancestors, how they can be woven into the very fabric of our being. But the beauty is that we actually have the power to do the work and release and let go of all of the things that don't serve us. And so importantly, we need to remember that as our ancestors live within us, we have a powerful opportunity to explore the strengths, the resilience, the gifts and talents that have travelled through our ancestral line to us, and how we can remember and reactivate those gifts that live within us, giving us such a greater sense of confidence around who we are, but also powerfully who we have the potential to become. See, we already have everything we need inside of us to fulfill any vision or dream that lives within us. If you've seen a vision for yourself, you can achieve it, because that vision comes from the place inside of you that absolutely knows that what you've seen is possible, because you are infinite, immortal and eternal. As the saying goes, the truth will set you free. So there you have it. There are so many powerful, beautiful treasures that lie within us, and your ancestors are but a breath away and can powerfully guide and support you in your life. So I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. I really, really, really appreciate you leaving your reviews, because your reviews, shares, Insta stories and screenshots are an enormous help to the podcast, especially as you share them with your friends, followers and audiences. And I just want to let you know that I really, really freaking appreciate you. Thank you so much, and I shall see you in the next episode. Alrighty then, bye for now.